Part 1 of my two-part presentation, Australia Did Not Exist Before the 26th of January 1788, ended with choosing a code. Part 2 is establishing a settlement. Once Phillip had decided on a place for the settlement, he lost no time in ordering the fleet anchored in Botany Bay to Sydney Cove, named in compliment to Lord Sydney, the Principal Secretary of State for the Home Department. He sailed to Sydney Cove in the Sirius on the evening of the 25th. On the morning of the 26th of January, he rowed ashore with his party. At daylight, the English colours were displayed on shore and possession was taken for His Majesty, whose health with the Queen's, Prince of Wales and success to the colony was drunk. A feu de joie, a volley, was fired by the party of Marines, and the whole gave 3 cheers, which was returned by the supply now at anchor in Sydney Cove. David Collins describes the same ceremony, recording that the supply and Sirius's crews came together in the evening. In the evening of this day, the 26th, the whole of the party that came round in the supply were assembled at the point where they had first landed in the morning, and on which a flagstaff had been purposely erected, and a Union Jack displayed, when the Marines fired several volleys, between which the Governor and the officers who accompanied him drank the healths of His Majesty and the royal family and the success of the new colony. Governor Phillip was keen to celebrate the momentousness of the occasion, something that many of his people might not quite have grasped. When he pierced the soil of Sydney Cove with his people's flagpole, raised their cultural symbol, and poured himself and his officers what amounted to a libation, he carried out a seminal act that would germinate like the proverbial mustard seed. He sowed the seeds of a new nation on an ancient continent, bringing the civilization to that mass of land. He inaugurated a new nation understood as a moral incorporation of people with an established culture and not merely a mass of land between geographical coordinates, which is ancillary to the primary notion. Captain Phillip and the people of the First Fleet did not only come ashore with provisions and animals, they landed on the shore of Sydney Cove a vast cargo of culture and technology which would begin developing in its own unique direction, a direction which would be an essential or ontological modification of their homeland's culture. What Contench describes what followed the inauguration. The landing of a part of the Marines and convicts took place the next day, and on the following the remainder were disembarked. Business now set on every brow, and the scene to an indifferent spectator at leisure to contemplate it would have been highly picturesque and amusing. In one place, a party cutting down woods, a second setting up a blacksmith's forge, a third dragging along a load of stones or provisions, here an officer pitching his marquee, with a detachment of troops parading on one side of him, and a cook's fires blazing up on the other. Through the unwearied diligence of those at the head of the different departments, regularity was, however, soon introduced, and as far as the unsettled state of matters would allow, confusion gave place to system. Everyone from Captain Phillip to the most intractable of convicts had the template of that cultural system in their heads and were unconsciously following the pattern. Accommodating the supreme ruling authority and organising living quarters for the newly arrived happened as a matter of course. What Contench writes, "In the head of the cove, on which our establishment is fixed, runs a small stream of fresh water, which serves to divide the adjacent country to a little distance in the direction of north and south. On the eastern side of this rivulet, the Governor fixed his place of residence, with a large body of convicts encamped near him, and on the western side was disposed the remaining part of these people, near the Marine encampment. That arrangement remained for the expansion of Sydney Town. Government House today is in the same place on the eastern side. The western side, a rocky incline, was called the Rocks, within months of settlement, and still bears that name today. After planting the flag and the founding ceremony as a seminal act of the new nation, it was time for the formal declaration of its legal and governmental structure, again from What Contench. Owing to the pressing business to be formed immediately after landing, it was found impossible to read the public commissions and take possession of the colony in form until 7 February. On that day, all the officers of the Guard took post in the Marine Battalion, which was drawn up and marched off the parade with music playing and colours flying to an adjoining ground, which had been cleared for the occasion, whereon the convicts were assembled to hear His Majesty's Commission read, appointing His Excellency Arthur Phillip Esquire, Governor-General and Captain-General in and over the territory of New South Wales and its dependencies, together with the Act of Parliament for establishing trials by law within the same, and the patents under the Great Seal of Great Britain for holding the civil and criminal courts of judicature, by which all cases of life and death, as well as matters of property, were to be decided. When the Judge Advocate had finished reading, His Excellency addressed himself to the convicts in a pointed and judicious speech, informing them of his future intentions, which were invariably to cherish and render happy those who showed a disposition to amendment, and to let the rigour of the law take its course against such as might dare to transgress the bounds prescribed. At the close, 3 volleys were fired in honour of the occasion, and the battalion marched back to their parade, where they were reviewed by the Governor, who was received with all the honours of his rank. His Excellency afterwards was pleased to thank them in public orders for their behaviour from the time of their embarkation, and to ask the officers to partake of a cold collation, at which it is scarce necessary to observe that many loyal and public toasts were drank in commemoration of the day. With the reading of the public commission, all the formal acts necessary to the new nation were completed. In a speech that followed, Governor Phillip radiated confidence and optimism about the colony and the direction in which he was determined to take it. He had a vision, and he would pursue for the people of the new pristine nation that vision. The following is a passage from that speech. "And I do not doubt that this country will prove the most valuable acquisition Great Britain ever made. We have come today to take possession of this 5th great continental division of the earth on behalf of the British people, and have founded here a state which we hope will not only occupy and rule this great country, but also will become a shining light among all the nations of the southern hemisphere. How grand is the prospect which lies before this youthful nation." This is unmistakable. Governor Phillip knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what the culture of which he was a faithful member demanded of him. He had come on its behalf to expand that culture into a new state and society, and to assert just authority over all who came under that authority. Whether one wants to call Governor Phillip's arrival at Sydney Cove an invasion or migration, it is really beside the point. Which point is about the origin of the Australian nation, who were its first people. Throughout history, nations and peoples have risen out of conquest or settlement following migration. Both in time are legitimate origins. To deny this would mean the absurd unravelling of continents of established nations. Note that the above commission refers to the territory on which the colony was established as New South Wales. No mention of Australia. The formal use of Australia would not be for another 40 years after the great explorer Captain Matthew Flinders began using it from around 1800 to refer to both the continents and its people. This question of name is an essential point about origins. It explains why I have used the same terminology as the map makers to describe the land of the South in its different historical periods. Terra Australis Incognita was an abstract term used to refer to a mass of land that existed in mythology. When the Portuguese and the Spanish came across the unknown coastline south of the Spice Islands, they referred to it as the land of the South, Terra Australis. It was the Dutch search for trading opportunities that gradually put form to that southern continent. Their search culminated in the crucial discoveries of Abel Tasman, who narrowly failed to join the dots. After Tasman's discoveries, the continent was referred to as New Holland. Even after Cook's success in establishing the continent's fixed coordinates, it continued to be called New Holland. The Aborigines had never heard of the name New Holland, much less the word Australia. The Aboriginals were a collection of sparse nomadic tribes wandering on a territory distinguished from the territory of another tribe with whom they had sometimes murderous disputes, as they eventually had with the British settlers. The concept of continent did not feature in their worldview. They were not a civilization as it was understood in the countries of Europe, which itself had advanced from tribal life to a complex social, political and economic structure with a highly developed technology. The technology required to build a craft and sail it to a precise point 12,000 miles away on the other side of the mostly unknown world, as Captain Phillip did and his people, was outside the vision or comprehension of the natives fearfully shouting "Warra, Warra, Warra" as the vessel sailed by. It is misleading and false to talk about the Aboriginals before British settlement as Australians, and altogether wrong to call them the first Australians. Indeed, the word Aboriginal is a post-settlement term to refer to a group of several hundred distinct tribes with different languages. It is reported that the Aboriginals on the south shore of Port Jackson could not understand the language of those on the north shore. This is the hard reality whether one likes it or not. It would make more sense to adopt a collective noun like Aboriginalia to refer to the collection of tribes before British migration and settlement. After settlement, everything changed in the same way it had done throughout history when peoples were on the move. Indeed, the continent's nomadic tribes were also rivals at some point in the past. The people's Aboriginalia would in time become integral members of the new nation of Australia and make their own unique contribution. Aboriginalia would drift into the mists of history. The way was now open for the development of the infant nation. Its concrete forms would come from within. What came from within was modified over time as the growing settlement adjusted to the physical environment. Nothing came from outside on the continent of New Holland. Such development would not be automatic, of course. There was always a risk that it would all fail and that the members of the settlement of Sydney Cove would perish, or the Aboriginals would drive them out, leaving them open for the inevitable attempts of colonisation at the hands of whoever had the inclination and the means to carry it out. There were many able and ready to make an attempt if the British colony failed. That the settlement did succeed was due to the leadership of Governor Phillip and his tough, persevering people in those first critical years, some of which were on a knife edge. Life was not only tough and demanding of sacrifice for those first settlers. Australia's colonial period demanded dedication and perseverance of everyone. It was especially the small, anonymous people who suffered and sacrificed in building the great nation we have today. In 3 or 4 presentations in the coming months, I will trace the lives of 4 of my ancestors who arrived in Australia in the 1820s and the 1830s. 2 were convicts and 2 were free settlers. Joy, achievement and tragedy would be part of their lives as they helped build our nation. The philosophical arguments about what it means to be a people or nation are in my presentation, Edmund Burke, on what it means to be a people. Both this presentation and it should be heard in combination to appreciate the full argument. That presentation will be on my channel, Edmund Burke Society of Australia. 6 videos of 25 to 30 minutes have been released of me and my son Roger on a road trip in search of where our Wilson, Jones and Harris ancestors lived and worked. We travelled up from Sydney, through Bringelly at the foot of the Blue Mountains, over the range to Hartley Village, then to Bathurst, Rylstone, Mudgee and on to Coonamble in northwestern New South Wales. We returned to Sydney via Tallawang, Golgong, Muswellbrook and Singleton. At each stop I did a presentation of who lived there and what they did. It was a common story of how most settlers contributed to the building of a nation. Here I am standing on the Castlereagh River near Coonamble. With the Castlereagh River as their boundary, the Wilson and Jones families ran farms of 16,000 acres here.